I found my wife having an affair with my son's best friend, and then she got her comeuppance. I've been married for 23 years. She's incredibly beautiful, smart and outgoing with a kind heart. I'm 57 and she's 55. I'm 57 and she's 55. While our personalities are different, they complement each other. Intellectual, while she's extroverted, intuitive and empathetic. We've traveled extensively and have 3 children, 2 girls and an unexpected boy. Our oldest is 20, a sophomore in college. College about 150 miles from home. We've been fortunate and enjoy the benefit of taking extended vacations as a family. Every 5 months or so, often exploring new places, especially islands and beach destinations. We're all in good shape and our kids bring us a lot of joy. Sometimes we even invite family and friends. Life has been great. I was married before for 4 years, but it wasn't a good match. I was young, immature, and emotionally dependent at the time. Looking back, I suspect my ex-wife had a personality disorder. And our later years together were a nightmare. She asked for a divorce for reasons that I didn't understand at the time. I now realize she was having an emotional or physical affair. At first I was devastated, but eventually I reached a breaking point and just wanted the pain to stop. The divorce was quick but bitter due to financial disputes. I was relieved when it was over and have no regrets. Career-wise, I had a successful run, holding senior positions for a global company at a young age, but due to a rare dis. I had to give up my career financially, living off my savings and investments. I've saved and invested wisely over the years. I have the freedom to work on my investments, but I miss working with others and leading a professional team to build something bigger in my career. I think we have moved from young love to a more mature and stable relationship. We have help so we can go out together whenever we want. We can go out together whenever we want, both as a couple and as a family. My hearing loss has been hard on us. It's frustrating. Because I can't participate in many group conversations, I miss them and become more introverted when I work alone. Dealing with my hearing loss has made me seem distant at times, which frustrates both my wife and me. She has to repeat things to me and I'm more likely to get annoyed. It's frustrating when my strong cognitive skills are hindered by not being able to hear. I'm frustrated and my strong cognitive abilities are hindered by not being able to hear or participate in group conversations. I have a shorter temper and less patience in conversations because I often miss things. In long discussions, I like to get to the point so I can hear everything, and I'm sure this can make me seem abrupt, so why am I here? I started to suspect something about 3 months ago, and it has been bothering me ever since. I didn't wait for more proof before confronting my wife. This suspicion has grown like a virus, going from a quiet doubt to a loud question. Is my wife gaslighting me about her affair? This persistent feeling that my wife is attracted to my son's 21-year-old best friend started about 3 months ago. Prior to August 2019, we were preparing for a vacation with our 3 children, and my son was home from school. Usually, my wife is in charge of planning our vacation destinations. Because she loves to travel and I enjoy seeing her excitement build in the weeks leading up to our trips, we've always have an active social life, mainly with a specific group of friends, most of whom we both know and almost all of whom are married. My wife often goes out to dinner with her married friends once or twice a week, either at a restaurant or at someone else's house. She tends to fill her schedule to the brim and has a hard time saying no. We usually coordinate our plans with family and friends well in advance, so it struck me as odd when I overheard my wife on the phone in the kitchen, not coordinating schedules, but actively persuading someone to join us on a trip. I couldn't hear very well, but it sounded like she was saying things like, "This is going to be so much fun, just like last time. Walk on the beach, snorkel, and more." It was almost like she was trying to persuade a child with candy. When she realized I was behind her, she got scared and almost dropped the phone. She clutched her chest as if I had given her a heart attack. And then quickly acted as if nothing had happened. I gave her a confused look, wondering what had just happened. She went into the pantry, then returned to the kitchen, seemingly to compose herself, and asked me what I wanted for dinner, a question she had asked me hours earlier. A few hours earlier, which struck me as odd. I repeated my dinner choice, then left the kitchen to join my children in the living room. Where we were watching television. A few minutes later, I was sitting at the dining with my wife and children, eating dinner and discussing school friends and other topics. Mentioned that my son's friend, let's call him Jason, had texted her expressing interest in joining us on our UPC vacation. This immediately caught my son's attention and he clarified that he hadn't told Jason about our vacation because he wanted to invite his girlfriend. However, because he was planning on inviting his girlfriend, my son mentioned that Jason had also texted him a few minutes. My son wanted to check with us before responding to his girlfriend, but I appreciated my wife bringing it up earlier. Appreciated that my wife had brought it up earlier. My son had informed us that he was girlfriend on the trip, so it seemed a bit odd to invite his friend since he would probably be spending most of his time with his new girlfriend. I also had a suspicion that my wife was not being truthful about the text message because I now believe that Jason might have been the person she was talking to on the phone, trying to convince him to come on our vacation. She acted as if Jason had initiated the idea. Jason is a good kid and he became best friends with my son when they were both 14 years old after meeting at a summer camp. Both of his parents are African American and live in a middle-class inner-city neighborhood. Both are employed in a delivery service that I will not name to protect their identities, although my son and Jason attend different schools. Jason's parents invested a lot of money to enroll him in several after-school programs that my son participated in. They also played basketball together and Jason often visited our house to play video games. I had met his mother a few times when she dropped him off at our house or picked him up from practice. My wife often volunteered to give him rides and had a soft spot for him. This didn't strike me as unusual because Jason was a well-behaved and intelligent young man with a promising future. College, so we hadn't seen much of him since. With all this background information, I initially thought that my wife might have lied to get Jason back to us, as she has a tendency to get involved in helping underprivileged kids, mentoring minorities, participating in progressive activities, and volunteering. I believed. I also liked Jason because he was remarkably mature for his age and could carry on adult conversations even better than my son. He was good company, so with all these factors in mind, I dismissed my 3 days before our vacation. My wife and our 18-year-old daughter went shopping to pick up a few things. It was a long trip, and they not only bought things for my son, but also some gifts for Jason. Even if I had known about this beforehand, I wouldn't have found it too unusual because she had a history of buying gifts for him. The next day, my son's girlfriend arrived in the morning and later in the evening, Jason joined us for dinner. That evening was a lot of fun. We all went out to dinner with my wife sitting next to me and Jason sitting next to my daughter. However, I couldn't help but notice that my wife kept looking at Jason. Throughout our time at the restaurant, even when I was talking to her, she seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood. I went along with it because seeing everyone happy made me happy when we got home. When we got home that night, I went to bed and my wife stayed up late with the kids. I'm not entirely sure, but I think she did. I think she finally went to bed around 3 a.m. The next day, as we were getting ready for our trip, I went through my checklist to make sure I didn't forget anything. I realized that my credit card was missing after we packed our bags. I looked everywhere for it for the trip, but I couldn't find it when I went through my wife's luggage because she had used it last. I noticed that she had bought one of those revealing open-back, crotchless bikinis. Inappropriate, especially for a mother of her age, but I thought she had bought it as a surprise for me during the trip. The next day we all took a business-class flight to our vacation destination, which was in the southwest region of Barbados. Barbados, specifically Carroll Bay, a spectacular and luxurious Caribbean beach and spa resort located on the southern shore of the island of Antigua, with its stunning white sand beach and tranquil turquoise waters. It truly felt like paradise and was one of the most beautiful resorts in Antigua. On the first day of our vacation, I spent most of my time relaxing on the beach and reading investment articles in the Wall Street Journal. While my family went scuba diving in the evenings, my wife, my son, his girlfriend and I decided to go to a restaurant with my daughter when my wife and the others returned home about 3 hours after my daughter. I returned home about 3 hours after my daughter and I noticed my wife was a little tipsy. She woke me up for intimacy. And it was one of the best experiences we'd had in months. The next day, I spent most of my time at the beach with my wife, and in the evening she told me she was going to a restaurant with my daughter's son. His girlfriend, and Jason, but around 10 a.m., when my son returned with his girlfriend and his sister, my wife and Jason were nowhere to be found. I asked them where my wife was and they said that she had gone out with Jason on a local wildlife tour that same night around 1 a.m. I woke up and my wife wasn't beside me. I wanted to enjoy the ocean breeze and wait for her return, but as soon as I opened the door to the living room, I noticed some quick movement around the couch. The TV was on, and I saw my wife pretending to lie down on one of the couches while Jason was on the other. While Jason was on the adjacent couch, my wife was wearing a revealing wraparound skirt, and underneath it, I remembered that. I remembered the color of the open back, crotchless bikini I had seen in her luggage. They were sitting separately, but looking awkwardly at the television, and even though the windows were open, the room felt heavy. I could smell the unmistakable scent of intimacy. My hearing may be failing, but my other senses were highly sensitive. At that moment I suspected that Jason had been close to my wife if I had opened the door more. Slowly, I think I would have caught them in the act. I didn't know how to react at that moment. I looked at both of them for a second. It was an unbelievably awkward situation. They clearly separated as soon as they heard the door open. Jason was wearing only shorts and no shirt, which wasn't too unusual considering our suite's proximity to the ocean. But I could clearly see that he was trying to hide in the hardwood. I returned to the bedroom and my wife followed me, thinking. Normally I could sense that there had been a closeness, and it seemed like she was trying to convince me that everything was normal. Was normal, as if they had just been watching TV that night. I felt an overwhelming sense of self-pity, depression, and loneliness. The combination of my hearing loss and the betrayal made me feel like I was slowly disappearing, as if my wife and family were beginning to overlook me. I was deeply humiliated and filled with shame. I had a restless night, and by the next day I knew I still had no concrete evidence, from the moment I overheard her on the phone persuading Jason to join us on vacation to the almost incriminating situation I almost walked into, seemed to add up at that point. I had a strong suspicion that my wife was having a physical relationship with my son's friend. I had only circumstantial evidence, but it bothered me so much that I felt compelled to confront my wife. I called her into the room that morning and admitted that I had caught her being close to Jason. I urged her to be honest and asked her how long this had been going on. She vehemently denied everything and was deeply upset that I would even consider such a thing. Her tactics worked and she won the argument. I had no proof. She even insisted that not only would I lose my hearing, but also my sanity. She was determined and persuasive, raising her voice to the point where I was afraid my children would hear her. The thought of my children discovering my unfounded jealousy of the young man they had known for over 60 years. That he was close to their mother would end up being a disastrous and embarrassing situation. I felt that I should have been more patient and gathered more evidence. Before confronting her, my emotions got the best of me, even though I'm usually a logical and rational person. I should have taken some time to think things through because I knew she would deny it. It was awful. My wife treated me with disdain, almost like I was a nuisance, but I felt like I had lost some of her respect. Deep down, I knew that what I was feeling was real. I was convinced that she was gaslighting me and that she was close to Jason. On the couch, but I just couldn't prove it. Update: 2 days ago I confronted my wife about my suspicions that she was having an affair with Jason. As expected, she vehemently denied it. Since then she has been giving me the silent treatment, and even our kids have noticed, but we've kept it to ourselves. I've also noticed that she's time alone with Jason and has started doing activities with all of us present. Was supposed to be about me, her, and our 3 children coming together, not driving us apart. We're filled with togetherness, fishing trips, picnics, and more. I didn't understand why she was so insistent on inviting him this time. It's not like Jason hadn't come on vacations before. In fact, when he was 19, we went on vacation with him, and if I remember correctly, I spent most of the time with my wife. But I'm not a night person, so I would go to bed early. On the other hand, she's a night person, so if there would have been I can't shake the feeling that this affair has been going on for a long time. I suspect she took more risks this time because she hasn't seen Jason as much since he went to college. Been busy with college. Looking back, I wonder about her frequent late-night dinners with married friends, which, interestingly enough, happen at least once or twice a week. Interestingly, these gatherings become more frequent when Jason is on break from college. Our closeness has always been healthy, but I've noticed that her libido has increased with age while mine has slowed. Once a week, and if she had her way, it would be more often. I can't help but wonder if we only have 2 days left before our vacation ends. Everyone seems to be having a good time except my wife and I. There's this tension between us that I want to resolve. I want to hit the reset button tonight and go back to the way things were before I confronted her. Tension to linger for another day, and I certainly don't want to carry it home with me, so I pulled my wife aside and I suggested that we go out to dinner at a secluded restaurant to talk things out, and she agreed. While the kids were busy with other activities, I put on a flowery shirt and she wore a sundress. The restaurant was about 300 yards from our resort, so we decided to walk there. We sat at a table for two and I was silent for a moment, hoping she would start the conversation. I felt that I had made a mistake the first time by revealing what I knew too quickly. Make her feel comfortable, apologize for falsely accusing her, and let her do more of the talking. Over the years, I've trusted her completely and given her everything. She betrayed that trust by disrespecting me, having an affair with a man much younger than her son, and lying about it. Lying about it, trying to guilt and shame me as if I were a fool. I'm the one who brought this family together. Family together, and I've worked hard to create the wealth she enjoys, even the dress she wears belongs to me. I have to admit that I've been consumed by work and my hearing loss. The loss may have distracted me, but it's a harsh realization that I put too much trust in my wife and didn't pay enough attention to what she was doing. It's bad enough that she's having an affair, but when it involves my son's friend, someone she was supposed to be mentoring, it hits very close to home. After an awkward silence, my wife was the first to speak. She apologized for not spending as much time with me during this vacation as we usually do. Suspicions about her and Jason because of their close friendship, she looked me straight in the eye and I simply nodded in response. No words were spoken. She went on to express her understanding that I had been distant lately, in part due to my hearing loss, and her efforts to reconnect with me. She also apologized for the hurtful things she had said earlier, explaining that anger had caused her to speak out of turn. She assured me of her loyalty and commitment to our relationship. Her opening words seemed positive, and I hoped that this conversation would lead to a more open and honest dialogue, and I acknowledged that I hadn't been myself recently. She had recently called me and expressed a desire for us to grow closer over the holidays, but I carefully avoided mentioning Jason or the affair. We enjoyed a lovely, romantic lunch together and returned to the resort holding hands for the rest of the day. Our stay was not eventful, and my wife made an effort to spend time with me, but it still felt forced, as if she did not really want to be with me. Perhaps it was my mind playing tricks on me now that I was aware of the affair. The image of my once pure and loyal wife had been shattered, and I felt as if I had been blind, but now I could see. After our reconciliation at dinner, the children no longer suspected anything, but I still couldn't shake the feeling. That's when I remembered I had cameras installed in our house, covering common areas like the front porch, the backyard, both sides of the house. Porch, the backyard, both sides of the house, the living room, the home theater, and the game room. The cameras stored footage for 30 days before deleting it, so I was hoping they might have caught something incriminating. I was eager to return home with this potential evidence, and I pretended to be. For the rest of our stay, everything was fine. To my wife, it probably felt like a close call. She probably believed I had forgotten all about it. Thought she had successfully manipulated my perception. She acted like the perfect mother and wife, but I could not. But I couldn't help but feel disgusted that she felt comfortable deceiving me. It gave me the impression that she had engaged in such behavior throughout our relationship, throughout my life, even in business. Business, honesty and loyalty have always been paramount to me, and being lied to or feeling deceived is something I abhor. When I returned from our trip, I was excited and didn't want to get my hopes up about finding anything about the cameras, because my wife was well aware of their presence. In fact, she had encouraged me to install them after seeing them at her friend's house. I didn't think she would be careless enough to engage in any suspicious activity within camera range. However, I held on to the possibility that she might have slipped up this time. Paranoia consumed me because she knew I was onto her. I worried that she would rush home and delete the footage before I had a chance to review it. Isn't particularly tech-savvy, so erasing the memory was beyond her capabilities. Still, she might try something to camera's memory and make it impossible for me to retrieve any information after we left the plane. I told my wife I wasn't feeling well, pretended to be sick and asked her to get a prescription for me. Prescription for me? She usually handles my prescriptions, and even though I was sure I didn't need a refill, I claimed to have. I told her that I and the kids would take another cab home so I could rest. Jason took a separate cab to his parents' house. As soon as I got home, I downloaded the footage from 2 days before our vacation onto a portable hard drive. these were the days that Jason had visited our house. To complete the download, but it was done before my wife returned, so I watched her closely to see if she was checking the camera's memory or do anything to tamper with it, but she acted as if the cameras didn't exist in her world. It took us until midnight to finish unpacking. All I could think about was getting everyone to bed so I could examine the footage when everyone was asleep. Finally asleep, I plugged the hard drive into my laptop and began the daunting task of reviewing the footage. I fast-forwarded to the specific timeline of Jason's visit on the night he arrived. He was staying in the guest bedroom, accessible through a hallway from the game room. As I fast-forwarded through the footage I spotted the game room camera. I pressed play at normal speed and the timestamp was 0:53 a.m. My wife met Jason in the hallway visible from the game room. He pulled her in for a kiss and they made out passionately for a brief moment. She playfully pushed him away and turned to leave the game room as he did. He playfully slapped her on the butt and she giggled her way out to the main area, even to a blind man. It was obvious they were having an affair. That was all the proof I needed. My heart was racing so fast I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I wasn't angry, but I was relieved that I finally had the proof I needed to confront my unfaithful wife. Just as I was about to close my laptop, she reappeared on the footage at 1:15 a.m. She was walking directly down the guest. She didn't reappear until 2:47 a.m., presumably on her way to the guest bedroom where Jason was staying. Since my son's girlfriend was staying in the guest room and Jason was the only person there, it was clear that she had joined him in the guest room with him in the guest bedroom for a private encounter, after which she went to the main area and then to our. Armed with the evidence I needed, I didn't wake her up the next morning. Contacted my attorney, who referred me to a divorce attorney. I scheduled a meeting for the same day, and after the interview, I had a better understanding of the significant financial impact this divorce would have on me. Financial implications. I knew I had to go through with a separation agreement with someone I couldn't trust, who had lied to me, blamed me, and even accused me of being prejudiced, all the while. A young man she was supposed to be mentoring. I realized that I didn't want my children to know the details of the divorce to avoid turning them against their mother, but I had no desire for Jason to remain a part of our lives. Although I recognized the circumstances and that he may not have initiated the affair, I didn't want a constant reminder of my wife's. Whether I would ever reveal this to my son and daughters, or whether I wanted them to know, remained uncertain. Nevertheless, I intended to use it as a bargaining chip in my dealings with my wife that night. Evening, with my children out of the house, I edited the video to include only the part where my wife and Jason were making out and her visit to the guest bedroom from 1:15 a.m. to 2:47 a.m. I called her into the room and played it on my laptop. After a few minutes she realized what it was and covered her face with her hands. And refused to look at the screen or answer any of my questions. I wanted to know details about their relationship, how it started, but she wouldn't give any answers. All she did was SOB, fully aware that there was no excuse. I took the opportunity to give her a taste of what she had put me through during our trip. Names, and the only time I got a reaction from her was when I mentioned sharing the video with our kids. She stopped sobbing, looked at me, and started begging on her knees, promising to do anything I asked her to do to stop me from revealing it to our children. I laid out my terms. She would accept any alimony I decided to pay, and we would proceed with an amicable divorce based on my terms. To go along with the story that our divorce was due to irreconcilable differences. My wife and our 3 children were present. The children had many questions. However, my wayward wife played her part by perpetuating the story that we had both been unhappy for a long time. Of us had been unhappy for some time and that separation was the best option. It was a very emotional night and my wife did her best to suppress her emotions so that the children would think she initiated the divorce, but it was clear that I was the one filing for divorce, no matter how hard we tried to hide it. She couldn't hold back her feelings, which made it a very sad day for our family. But found myself shedding tears when I was alone in the bedroom. Well, that's the way it is. Another failed marriage for the same reason. I can't help but wonder why I keep getting married. Update. So after we told our kids about our separation, my kids understandably struggled with the news. My youngest, who is now 16, took it the hardest. She couldn't understand why we couldn't reconcile. The next day, my oldest daughter came into the room to talk to me. And I used to share. My wife now sleeps in the guest room. My daughter told me that she had tried to reach her mother by knocking on the door. Tried to reach her mother by knocking on her door, but she didn't get an answer. She was confused as to when and how things had gone wrong, because just a few days ago we had all seemed so happy during the vacation trip. Bed, trying to get me to reveal the reason for the divorce, and her constant crying almost caused me to make a mistake. She mentioned that we had cut her out of our lives, and that bothered me because I thought we had. Didn't think we had, but I assured her that her mother would let her know when things calmed down. Her mother and I had a great marriage and had raised 3 beautiful children, for which I was grateful, but there comes a time. There comes a time when people fall out of love, and that's what happened. I gave her a somewhat vague answer, and she was smart. Smart enough to sense that she might have left the room suspecting infidelity on my wife's part, but she didn't want to push me too far. Too far, perhaps fearing what she might discover, since she's close to her mother. Figured she'd find out the truth soon enough. The next day I had an appointment with my otolaryngologist for a hearing aid. Hearing aid, which greatly improved my hearing. My wife stayed in her room for a few days. We usually eat dinner together, but my kids took their food to their rooms and I didn't see my wife all day. I was the only one at the dinner table. My oldest daughter is an excellent cook, so she usually prepares meals for the family. She's a really great kid and I couldn't be more proud of her. We used to be a normal, traditional American family. Traditional American family, we'd eat dinner together, exchange kisses, and I love you, go to church as a family. It felt really strange to see my kids not eating dinner together and our family falling apart like this. Years building this family into what it was, and my wife had just torn it apart because of an affair. As I sat alone at the dinner table, I felt anger toward my wife, but I also wondered if I was doing the right thing. I mean, I wasn't unhappy with the marriage before D-Day, and it's not like I wasn't getting enough closeness from my wife. I've heard stories of wives cheating and denying their husbands closeness during their affairs, but that wasn't the case for me. In my situation, my wife never denied me intimacy or affection during our marriage. She treated me incredibly well, and I always felt that I was her top priority, even before our children. Jealous and betrayed, I wondered if her affair with Jason was driven by an insatiable desire she needed to satisfy. Maybe Jason was the easiest option for her because he was readily available. It wouldn't have been any easier, but it wouldn't have been someone my son considers his best friend. The next day, my son's girlfriend left, and I had a chance to talk to my son, although we didn't go into many details. He didn't ask why we were breaking up, he just wanted to know how I was doing. I knew he had talked to my daughter because of the way he asked his questions. About a day later, my wife finally emerged from her grief. She looked like she had been crying a lot, with puffy eyes, unkempt hair, and the appearance that she hadn't showered in days. That evening, the two of us ate the dinner my daughter had prepared. But we sat at opposite ends of the dining room table. Crying with swollen eyes, while my wife should be the one on her knees begging for forgiveness. Alone, carrying the heavy burden of not being able to tell my children about her affair. About my wife's well-being, because she seemed to be taking it really hard. She's usually the life of the party. Always cheerful, makes everyone feel welcome and cared for. She's very nurturing and caring, don't get me wrong. I'm deeply hurt by this, but I've become very good at hiding it and pretending that everything is okay. The next day, my wife asked if we could go to a restaurant we both liked to talk at. I didn't really want to because I was still hurt by her affair. But given the tension between us and the kids, I felt we needed to break the ice if we were going to separate. We're going to separate, which was the plan. It should be amicable. We shared the same car and didn't talk much on the way there, and when we took our seats, she acknowledged that she was sorry for all the pain she had caused me. And for betraying my trust. She mentioned that she was so embarrassed and ashamed that she didn't want to leave. In our room, she admitted that she had been selfish, driven by instinct without considering the consequences for those she loved. Stressed her deep love for me and her desire to spend the rest of her life with me. She revealed that she didn't. The extent of the pain she had inflicted until she was discovered. I allowed her to finish her apology. Before I responded, pointing out that her remorse seemed to stem from the fact that she had been caught, and that I felt we had a. As soon as I mentioned this, her expression changed to one of distress. She lowered her head, holding it with both hands as if she had a headache, then raised it and looked at me. With tears in her eyes, she began fanning herself as if she were hyperventilating. Did not react to her dramatic reaction. She was silent for a moment and then admitted that she understood that she would have to. Eventually she would have to tell them the truth, but she needed time to gather her courage. Relationship, she suggested the idea of allowing an open marriage on my part while she remained faithful. Not to pressure her to tell the children the truth, and suggested that we keep it between us. I asked her how long the affair had been going on, and she claimed that the affair had been going on for 6 years. Been going on for 6 years, mind you, Jason must have been in high school then. Pressed her for more details, and she explained that the first incident was a coincidence. Daughter's basketball game. She was supposed to watch our daughter's first basketball game with our son, who had invited. The game was scheduled for around 5 p.m., but there was a delay, so our daughter was practicing with her team while our son was either watching or playing on his phone. As she was talking to our son, she mentioned that she needed some fresh air and that Jason was with her. Went with her. They ended up in her minivan, and one thing led to another, resulting in a kiss and intimacy in the back seat. Intimacy in the back of her minivan in the high school parking lot. She admitted to feeling guilty and cheap about it, and they promised not to repeat it or tell anyone, but over the years they continued their close encounters before our vacation. She hadn't seen him in over 6 months, she claimed she hadn't. I thought about it until Jason showed up to join us on vacation, and I sensed that she wasn't telling the whole story that I knew. Jason hadn't invited himself, she had convinced him to come. I confronted her with this fact before she admitted it. She wanted a chance to see him again, and she had always wanted to go on vacation with him, and she thought this was her chance. She confessed that the day before our vacation they had been close, caught by security cameras, and they had been intimate. During the vacation, when I discovered them, she explained that she cares for him and can't resist being physically close to him. Close to him when they're together, but her love for me remains strong. Relationship with him is purely physical, perhaps to make me feel better. She mentioned that as she's gotten older, her desire for intimacy as she has gotten older. Intimacy left her constantly unsatisfied and frustrated. Since I no longer desired it as much as she did, she professed her love for me, but admitted that she had been experiencing sexual frustration for a long time. Jason to fill the void, and it reached a point where she could no longer control her desires, ultimately normalizing the affair. Revealed that she had sought help from a psychotherapist and was prescribed antidepressants, which are used to treat conditions such as depression, anxiety, or obsessive-compulsive disorder. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, which can help with compulsive sexual behaviors. However, she stopped taking the side effects. She claimed that psychotherapy and the use of certain adult toys provided some relief, but the affair with Jason continued. She claimed that he was the only person she had been unfaithful to, and that the treatment and the adult toys had helped her manage her urges. When she shared all this information with me, which she had never disclosed to me before, I felt confused and guilty, wondering if knowing earlier might have. I asked her why she hadn't told me all this before. She said she had told me. She said she had mentioned it several times, though not in great detail, dropping hints along the way. Felt that I had already withdrawn from our intimacy. She pointed out that I was only interested in intimacy once or twice a week. Times a week, while she craved it at least once a day. She mentioned the times I had denied her intimacy and how she had often been the one to initiate it. She clarified that she wasn't trying to blame me, and acknowledged that her sexual desire was the one that deviated from the norm. She wanted to work on herself because she recognized that I was already. After our conversation in the restaurant, my anger had subsided somewhat, and I had a sense of my wife's silent struggles. Of my wife's quiet struggles, realizing that she might have a borderline obsession with intimacy and trying to manage her desires. I had always known about it, but I hadn't taken it seriously because she hadn't always been like this. So she wasn't being dishonest when she claimed to have tried to communicate her needs to me, but I had dismissed her concerns. I even knew she had some toys, but I hadn't cared much because I was getting intimacy when I wanted it. Intimacy when I wanted it. I realized that my attitude was somewhat selfish and that I should have paid more attention to her desires. I felt that she might be dealing with some form of illness and was struggling with it. Relieving to understand her perspective, but regardless of her state of mind, what she had done was wrong. Had broken our marriage vows, and I believe there should be consequences, but at that point I began to decision to divorce my unfaithful wife and felt the need to talk to someone, so I made an appointment with my therapist. He recommended that, given the closeness of her relationship with her affair partner, she should. I asked if he thought it was necessary to tell my children, but he explained that he could not assess my. He also mentioned that it might not matter much. What mattered was that I controlled the narrative he had. He did not have a strong opinion on the matter, but suggested that if I chose not to tell my children, I should instruct my wife to tell Jason that their affair was over. Jason that their affair had been discovered and to never contact them or any of my family members again. He recommended that I consider a trial period of 2 to 3 months to see if my feelings about divorce remained the same. Individual counseling for both of us, and when asked about couples counseling, noted that it might be beneficial for her to express herself to an impartial observer after the therapy session. How I felt about the whole situation, but as I thought about the well-being of my children, the long-standing relationship with my wife, and the happiness we shared as a family, I came to the conclusion that it wouldn't hurt to give the 2 to 3 month probation a chance. I discussed the terms with my wife that night. That she would have to cut off all contact with Jason and never communicate or meet with him again. The affair to my son and my oldest daughter, who would also have no contact with Jason. That if she violated these terms, would proceed with the divorce proceedings I had already initiated. Her mistake, and expressed her willingness to do whatever was necessary to save our marriage. The truth would eventually come out. She feared how our children would perceive her, but agreed not to divulge explicit details and to accept the. After the discussion with my wife in the restaurant, tensions in our household began to ease. My children were curious and uncertain about whether we were still going through with the divorce. We were still going through with the divorce, but they hadn't asked me directly to eat dinner together as a family again, and things were slowly returning to normal in the household, although my wife and I still slept in separate bedrooms, after the conversation with my wife about revealing her affair to my son and daughter. After dinner, we sent our youngest daughter to her room and gathered my son and oldest daughter in the living room. Gathering my son and oldest daughter around the dining room table, I began by explaining to my children that their mother was the reason for my initial desire for divorce, but that we were now working toward reconciliation. Then it was my wife's turn to speak, and it took her a while to find her words. Tears streamed down her face as my children watched curiously, wondering if her emotions were real or an act. It was painful to watch. Perhaps she was trying to soften the blow by evoking sympathy, that's what I thought. She began by expressing her disappointment in herself and how she had embarrassed herself and made a huge mistake by. The room fell silent as I looked at my children to gauge their reactions. She kept her head down in shame and avoided eye contact with my children and me as soon as she admitted it. This caused my daughter's jaw to drop and my son to erupt in a fit of angry expletives. He abruptly stood up and stormed off to his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Slamming the door behind him, I sat across from the dining table. My daughter sat 2 chairs to my right, and my wife sat on my left. My daughter wore a look of shock on her face for at least a minute. She whispered loudly, I knew it," and I stayed in my seat, watching the unfolding drama, my emotions mixed and unsure. Uncertain how to interpret the situation, my daughter approached me and offered me a hug, and although I didn't respond, she clung to me tightly. Meanwhile, my wife was openly sobbing and I suspected that my daughter was shedding tears. As I witnessed my wife's deep anguish, I felt genuine concern for her. I'd never seen her like this. Distraught, my wife finally got up and left the room, retiring to the guest room and closing the door behind her. My daughter asked me if I was okay and I assured her that I was. Information, and while I had not forgiven her mother, I understood why it had happened. To keep her in the dark any longer, which was why I had pushed her to reveal the truth that night. I went to bed with a clear conscience, knowing that tomorrow was a new beginning and it was better to start with honesty than to continue with lies. The next day, my daughter prepared breakfast for me, my wife stayed in her room, and my son had already left the house. My daughter told me that he was still upset and was planning to move out to get away from his mother because he couldn't stand being around her for most of the day. I spent most of the morning talking to my daughters, especially my eldest, who tried to distract me from my wife. Away from my wife's infidelity and into something positive, by the afternoon, my wife still hadn't come out of her room. Out of her room, which worried my daughter because they had plans to run errands and were running late. Knocked on the door for what felt like over 10 minutes, but my wife didn't answer as evening approached When evening approached and my wife still hadn't come out of her room, I began to worry, so I decided to knock on the door myself, but she didn't answer. I had believed that things were getting better, but it seemed that my wife wasn't handling the situation well at first. Thought she might be too embarrassed to face my children, but the situation became increasingly strange during dinner that night. She didn't join us that night, and my son hadn't returned home either. I called him to check on him and he told me he was at a friend's house. So it was just me and my 2 daughters having dinner that night when I didn't hear from my wife. When I heard nothing from my wife the next morning, I knew something was wrong and decided to force the door open with the help of my eldest daughter. When we managed to open the door, we discovered my wife lying face down under the covers. I also noticed some pills and a glass of water nearby and immediately told my daughter to call for help. I checked her pulse, but her body had already begun to change color. My younger daughter began to cry and shook my wife. Trying to wake her up while my older daughter was on the phone with the emergency services. It didn't take a medical professional to see that she had passed away almost a day ago. I felt completely numb, torn between crying and screaming, overwhelmed by shock and guilt, convinced that this was all my fault. It took me a while to regain my composure. The ambulance had already arrived and was preparing to place her in a body bag. I'm not sure who contacted my son, but he had already arrived and was sobbing uncontrollably. I spent most of the night talking to the investigators.